So I'm going to just introduce Tony before I turn it over to him for his presentation today. So Tony Brown is the current Director of Contracts and Grants here at the Institute of Human Virology at the University of Maryland here in Baltimore. He's a certified research administrator with over 15 years of experience in helping principal investigators position themselves for success in the university/academic setting. He is a results-oriented professional with proven experience in management of multiple funding mechanisms, including sponsored funds, grants, contracts, cooperative agreements, sub-awards, and clinical trials. He also has a lot of experience with gifts and philanthropy, endowments, generating operating and clinical revenues and expenses. He has served in multiple leadership roles in both large and small departments and has served as a divisional administrator, overseeing the intersection of all funds that support a department. Prior to joining the Institute here in Baltimore, Tony worked at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. And so he brings a wealth of experience into this position and also into this series that we're having today. He directed a team of analysts and managers on all aspects of research administration for the life cycle of awards across 9 distinct departments, both clinical and basic science. He also oversaw the financial management of over 750 plus accounts. He supported over 250 plus research faculty and coordinated over 500 competing submissions annually. He was named the Executive Business Director of the Johns Hopkins Center of Excellence in Influenza Research and Response, a contract funded through the National Institutes of Health, and oversaw all aspects of contract business management, including invoicing, financial reporting, exercised options, compliance, and foreign sub-recipient monitoring. Tony continues his commitment to research administration here at the Institute of Human Virology in helping us, faculty and programs, obtain our goals in various ways and enjoy being part of solving unique and complex challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my rare privilege and honor to welcome Tony Robbins, and I'm going to hand over to him to take us through on the presentation, Building Effective Compliance Frameworks for Local Organizations Seeking Funding. And thank you very much, Tony, and welcome.
Thank you, Chinedu, for that excellent introduction. And thank you, Dr. Sylvia and Jen, for having me here today. It's a real honor to be here, to be speaking on behalf of everybody. I will go ahead and dive right in, as I don't think I can make a better introduction than what you had, Chinedu. All right. Can everybody see my screen? I believe so.
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. All right.
Yes, we can.
Thank you all again. I'll just dive right in. As Chinedu said, I come with a lot of wide variety of experiences in a lot of departments. Formerly at my previous institution, Johns Hopkins University, I started my time in the controller's office and really learned the closeout process, kind of the framework, if you will, the confines, the box that we have to reside in. And I extrapolated that out when I moved into a department setting where I spent a vast majority of those 14 years working directly with faculty. So a lot of my work was predicated on adopting the policies and procedures that the university has. Also, the governing rules that our sponsoring agencies, terms and conditions are set forth in our agreements to produce a favorable, a positive outcome in positioning our research for success. And so without further ado, I'll just kind of dive right in. So really at a high level, how do you define, develop, and ensure adherence to your organization's policies? How do you utilize the resources that you have? And more importantly, how do you overcome the resources that you do not? And that is one thing that has been consistent in all of my years of supporting faculty members and researchers, is that oftentimes we are operating within a resource poor or stretched environment where time constraints, we want to get to everything, but there's only a certain amount of time in every day. And the most important thing to ensure that we don't lose sight of is appeasing the compliance and the reporting requirements while juggling those multiple demands, because they can be a significant challenge. And obviously, we don't want to fall on the wrong radars from our sponsors and our donors, where we could potentially be, flagged for potential audit risks, or even, audit findings as well, both internally within your organization and even also externally. And without a policy or a procedure to follow, you cannot really guarantee your success, nor can you point to an established policy that exists to prevent said bad outcome from occurring. And so if a policy doesn't exist, it's really an opportunity for your organization to strengthen those internal controls, both at maybe a university or organizational level, but also at a department level. And oftentimes, a lot of the work that we do that shapes policies at an organizational level actually was inspired by a finding that maybe occurred in a department, and it constitutes that questioning and answering of why did this happen, what did happen, and what can we do to prevent it moving forward. And this is all geared towards making sure that we're appeasing things that are set forth in our OMB circular, certainly CFR auditing standards, terms and conditions that are unique and specific to our awarding agencies that we're receiving funding from to support our research. All of these shape the policies that we must follow in our day-to-day. And so what is the difference between a policy and a procedure? Right. So as defined by University of Maryland, Baltimore, a policy is a principle or a protocol to guide decisions and achieve rational outcomes, and is stated as intent. The policies included in our UMB library are intended to regulate and control organizational actions. They flow from the University of Maryland, which it supports multiple universities that are comprised of that. And using a similar content, organization, and numbering system, the University of Maryland can approach all of these all of the organizations and universities that fall underneath that umbrella, and they can be consistent amongst all of the institutions that are there, that are part of the University System of Maryland. And a procedure, on the other hand, is a customary method of handling business, right? So procedures in the library are routine business processes on campus that could maybe involve one or two departments working together to complete university goals. They could be procedures that are unique to your specific department that are a part of the day-to-day that must be followed. And documenting these separately from a policy allows for increased flexibility and responsiveness. So the most important point to take home here is that all departments are very unique and different. You might be working within the same ERP system, you might be working within the same systems, but every department or organization has its own unique nuances that are specific and unique to that particular organization. And the key point here is that you could have unique procedures within your department, but you have to follow the minimum requirements of policies that are set forth by your organization. And so that really serves as your minimum that you go to. You can always go higher, but you really can't fall lower than what the policy that's set forth by your organization says. You must do this when XYZ occurs. And so this is really where a policy and coordination office is incredibly helpful, because you want to make sure that the policies that you have are number one, published and available for public access or for your employees to see, but also ensuring that any undesirable outcomes or audit findings or perhaps modifications that were necessary, that were inspired by those audit findings, that our policies are being updated. We're editing policies that already exist. We're not creating policies on top of policies where there creates confusion in that regard. And that's why our policy and coordinations office usually exists, especially in larger organizations. So just continuing on with the compliance framework, what are example policies that could or should be defined by an organization's, I'll refer to it as kind of the controller's office, right? The group that governs and says what you can and cannot do, and pun intended, controls what the day-to-day of our departments or what our organization should be doing. So you could have a travel policy, which is typically updated annually and can sometimes actually be in fact requested by sponsors when we go to submit for a bid for, say, a contract. impact. You should have an effort reporting policy. It's the expectation of certified effort for individuals that are supported by federally sponsored projects. We have effort that we have to routinely certify on either a quarterly or semi-annual basis. All organizations are unique in that regard, but there is an expectation that effort is certified. And at that point in time, it really should be a formality, right? If we are meeting with our faculty throughout the life cycle of an award and they had X amount of percent effort on specific projects, that should be reflected in what we're seeing with our effort profiles. And so really it should be a formality at that point in time. And if it's not a formality and there's a lot of challenges that exist at that level, perhaps we're not meeting with our faculty enough to understand all the ins and outs of all the efforts that they have, especially in academics. It's not always just research. It could be clinical, it could be teaching, it could be administrative. There's a number of things, and specifically in academics, that a faculty member could be comprised of, not just research. Cost transfer policies, right? So in accordance with 2 CFR 200, which is uniform guidance surrounding cost principles and audit requirements for federal awards, we need to make sure that we are reconciling our accounts on a timely basis. And when cost transfers take place, are we doing it within the confines of our policies? So I'm accustomed to, costs being transferred, reconciled within 90 days, and anything greater than 90 days is deemed late, and anything within 90 days is on time. Your organization might have 60 days. It all really depends on your organization, your size, your scope, and the expectations that are set forth by your organization. But nonetheless, is there transfer policies in place where we're not transferring something from a project from maybe over a year ago or 2 years ago or something extravagant like that, or really where audit could raise their eyebrows and constitute red flags. Well, why wasn't this transferred before? Are you not looking at your accounts? Those types of questions become part of that conversation in those types of instances if those types of items are audited. Certainly having a uniform policy governing human resources, what's available, and the rights to the employees that are a part of your organization, certainly upper leadership, director, upper management, what are the policies that set forth that govern, the tools in your tool belt, if you will, to support the team members, your employees that comprise of your team, that push all of these items forward. Getting into research integrity, such as, copyrights, human subjects research, animal or vertebrate animal research, patents, invention reporting, all of these items come to play. They're all nuanced. They're specific, potentially down to a school level or even a department level. But do we have, potential frameworks surrounding, research integrity and responsible conduct of research? Conflict of interest comes to mind as well in this area. Procurement, ensuring that we are getting the most competitive price for the supplies that we're sourcing, even though our sponsors are paying for it. Are we going through a process that is really ensuring that we're not being taken advantage of because we have sponsoring agency money to pay for it, but no differently than if you were going to a store and you wanted the best price or wanted to get something on sale, so to speak, right? We want to make sure that we are doing that as well and making sure that we are, being good stewards of our finances, of the budgets that we do have. This is a link to University of Maryland, which might actually be behind a UMID. But again, I wanted to establish that there is a policies and procedures area that is simply accessed through a click of a button where, anything of those categories, and there's a multitude of categories, like they refer to it as a library, right? There's a lot of different things that are policized. And so if your organization doesn't have access to that, it's potentially an opportunity to think about those things to make sure that the employees have what they need to feel supported when they're making business decisions on a daily basis. So when I keep referring to it as the controller's office. It's kind of the nomenclature that I, started at. What really is the controller's office? And that could include any of the following groups. Your sponsored projects office, which for me, that was unique to, my first position in getting involved in a university setting, where I was a part of establishing master data. I was a part of establishing, the account creation, rapport with my departments, the billing plan, the billing rule, What is our reporting requirements and when are they due, establishing start dates and end dates of the project. All of these things were kind of established in a separate group that was a shared service group that supported multiple departments and multiple functions, but it was a group that was isolated from the department that had a distinct responsibility. Accounts payable is pretty self-explanatory, but are we paying our bills, right? We're sourcing goods, lab materials and supplies, pieces of equipment that we need to do the work. Are we doing right by our vendors and paying them timely? Do they have a procurement process where there's a purchase order that's eventually assigned to a number, where your vendor can reach out to your organization and say, hey, we haven't been paid for purchase order, so and so. Accounts receivable and billings kind of synonymous together. They've always been kind of grouped together in my experience. Billings, where we're sending the invoicing out. After all, it's very important that we get paid for the good work that we do. And oftentimes we're getting paid in arrears. So in other words, we are spending that money up front and we are getting paid on the back end. So it's important that we have timely invoicing, which is establishing timely burn rates of our money. And then the accounts receivable department, which, oftentimes you could be somebody that is billing and also following up on the collections, right? We haven't received this payment. What's the status? Our cash accounting office, this could be related to the size, but just, making sure that our bills are getting paid timely. I'm sorry, this is where, we could work with a group that we have multiple streams of funding through one sponsor. And this is very common on commercial clinical trials, where we could be receiving payments from one specific pharmaceutical company, but we could have dozens of projects with that one, and they don't always remit with identifying details. And so having a group that is working through parceling that out, again, I think that is size specific to your organization. But again, if that's occurring in a department setting, again, going back to that resource related dilemma, that's just less time available to the faculty member, but is a part of proper stewardship of the finances of the account, and making sure that we are claiming the payments that we've received for the work that we're doing. Certainly compliance and effort comes into play. Compliance group, undoubtedly there's going to be questions that are going to come up from the day-to-day, questions that you and your manager and maybe your fellow administrator are not going to be able to answer, and you're going to need maybe a second opinion, right? And so having a compliance group that exists within that setting is always a nice thing to have, perhaps sometimes in an organization, a luxury to have. But again, based on the size, that is a group that's going to help aid in the decision making. That's going to kind of be the end all be all decision there as well. And this is a group that also was a part of effort completion as well. So this was, a critical thing, that we had certified effort forms by a particular point of time. I've seen instances where if we didn't certify our effort timely, it was wrote off. In other words, if you couldn't certify your time to a project on a timely basis, then perhaps it didn't happen. And so, depending on your university, depending on your organization, there's a lot of approaches there to kind of proverbially hold your feet to the fire to ensure that those activities are being completed. And again, this is all rooted in multiple competing and juggling demands on a daily basis, and really understanding what's a priority, what isn't, is always a challenge on the day-to-day. Internal audits, self-explanatory, but these are the testing and procedures that takes place within an organization to say, hey, this is our policy and we're seeing this not taking place. And so I've seen a lot of times, in a lot of groups that I was a part of in my former institution, where I was introduced to a lot of different departments, there was always some commonalities that was always, not always was common was, account reconciliation processes, effort, certification, and the timely effort certification, and also subrecipient monitoring as well. Those are areas that were tested constantly and routinely. And those are items to ensure that we're not triggering a potential external audit down the road. Internal audits is an opportunity to shape and tweak the internal controls that we already have. And if the internal controls exist, then tweaking the execution that's taken place within the department as well. We touched on procurement and travel earlier, so we don't have to talk too much about that. But again, having that group within the controller's office, a shared services group supporting multiple departments or multiple outfits within your organization. If you are a teaching university, student accounts, but also other considerations that could be school specific. We've mentioned about a policy and coordination office, a conflict of interest office, which is a very big thing, and often asked about in every submission that we put forth at UMB, answering those questions surrounding conflict of interest. ICOOC, or the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee, and IRB. So these are all items that govern how we do research for vertebrate animals and do research on human subjects. And those are, groups that are distinct, unique, and separated out from other groups that are an independent, have independent individuals that basically answer the question in its simplest form: is this research that we should be doing, or is this research that we should not be doing? And if this is research that we shouldn't be doing, can we tweak the protocol to get this into a more a form that is more accepted with what our organization is comfortable with? And certainly a general counsel's office and a dean's office. Again, I touched on that at a compliance level. With the general counsel's office, it might introduce that level where you really need that governing body to, and these are your more challenging and difficult situations at a very high level, things that potentially threaten perhaps the university brand as well. And having that office to discuss and talk on those matters, it could be a real critical need for your organization. So diving into the sponsor projects office, this is just the group that received their fully executed agreements from our Office of Research Administration. They call it the Sponsor Programs Administration Office, but these hold our signatory authorities or authorized representatives for the university. And these are the individuals that can sign on behalf of the university. So I sit in a department setting, and in all of these 15 years that I've spent doing research administration, I have signed off on particular things, but I've never signed and committed my institution to receiving an award or an agreement with another institution. Those are things that I was not a part of. And so having a singular or a group, if you will, that serves that function is really critical to your business, because you want to have that separated out from the department, because those individuals could be looking at things from a different lens point than what you're going to see in the department. And so those groups exist for a particular reason. After receipt of the agreement, the sponsor projects team, after receiving that agreement from the SPY office that is fully executed, they established the master data. So this was kind of like my first role, if you will, where I was establishing the start and end dates of the awards, FFR reporting dates, sponsor class or general ledger categories for each project, establishing the budget for the initial year, account closeout, cost overrun processing, responding to sponsor inquiries, and submitting FFRs within their respective portals. I had the FFR role specifically to use NIH as the example. That FFR role is an actual role that is assigned to your area Commons login. So in a department setting, I have a different role. I don't have that FSR role that can be used to submit FSRs. And what you're seeing here is the separation of duties. That's what you're seeing. You're seeing one particular individual that can't do all of those things. Those duties are separated for good reason, because it's another set of eyes reviewing the things that we are submitting to a sponsor and making sure that things are what they should be and things look the way that they should. And in terms of master data, a lot of groups work kind of within an enterprise resource planning system or an ERP that effectively pulls all of the business functions together within one system. Oftentimes that one system isn't quite good enough to appease all things and requires shadow systems, but nonetheless, this is the system or the programs that help prevent us from making mistakes, right? So a lot of our agreements, they have a start date, they have an end date. So we shouldn't have cost outside of that period. If we need more time, we need to submit a no cost extension. Likewise, if equipment is not an available sponsor class or restricted or travel or even fringe, we're establishing master data to not even have that as an available general ledger or sponsor class to build to, right? Why even create the opportunity? And so these are all things that can be done at a very high level, depending on what ERP system. In my experience, I was using SAP. We now use Oracle. There's a lot of them out there, all of them of which have their advantages and disadvantages. And so, using the systems to our advantage to prevent bad or negative outcomes from happening is a unique advantage to potentially the software system that you use, but one that should be taken fully advantage of if you're not doing so. So accounts payable, they define the procedures for paying our invoices to multiple parties. This could be vendors, contractors, subrecipients, even employees, right? And ensuring duplicate payments are not being made. In other words, we're not double paying or making payments that we don't need is a critical function of that. So does your organization have multiple payment methods that are supported, right? So we do anything from wire payments to check request. We have procurement cards that we utilize that could be used in a pinch from time to time and for particular, functions of our business. But this is a group that kind of sets and out, within the controller's office and is separate of the department. And so the actual payment or the money being transferred is occurring with separate teams. And then there's usually a confirmatory goods receipt or confirmation that's taken place in the department. And so, in the department, you're submitting, an invoice that's being reviewed by somebody in accounts payable that's processing the payment in the ERP system. And then we're sending that back to the department for somebody else's review to confirm that that amount is good. So for example, if we were sourcing, payment for, 10 different items and 8 were received in good standing, 2 were damaged in transit, we're maybe paying 8 of those things instead of 10. But there are multiple parties that are reviewing that. I've heard the terminology of a 3-way match and ensuring that the payment is being remitted. AP reviews the invoice payment request, and the process for payment to be released is all occurring with multiple individuals. And this is just to ensure the correct amount is leaving your organization, and that there's not one particular party that's doing all of these things. And so that's where I think you see a lot of potential audit risk in your organization, that at least in my opinion, because it just creates a lot of opportunity for bad outcomes to take place, that one person should not be able to review an invoice, submit an invoice, to process that invoice for payment, and then trigger something in the system to make payment. You'll want to have that separated by at least 2 people initiating and approving payments. There's a lot of ways that fraud can take place when you have one singular person doing all of those functions and items. You've heard, and I have heard, of horror stories of one individual setting up its own vendor in the system that actually has a personal connection to that individual or family member, and making payments to that vendor from sponsoring agencies' funds. It happens. It's been published publicly. It's a significant thing, and it's a real thing, and it's a real risk. And if you don't have the proper policies and procedures to follow to mitigate that risk or minimize that risk, potentially you're creating opportunities for that risk to take place in your organization. On the flip side, the accounts receivable and billing side, obviously reimbursing for our costs for the important work that you all do is an obvious need that needs to be met. And the most important thing that you can ensure that we're meeting our deliverables outlined in our sponsoring agencies agreements. There's a burn rate aspect to this as well, making sure that our sponsoring agencies' monies are being, we're demonstrating to our sponsor that we are utilizing the funds, right? There's usually some level of key personnel effort, right? So if I'm PI, I should be on the project. If we're 3 or 4 months into the project and we have submitted no invoicing or no draws, to the payment management system, sponsors potentially raising their eyebrows saying, is the work even being completed here? I used to always have the question about me, how do we get paid? Right. Most important thing. And if you don't know the answer to that, you need to investigate that further. That sounds very simple, but understanding how we get paid is a critical function, right? And there's a lot of different payment strategies, right? So a clinical trial or an enrollment-based project is much different than, a monthly invoicing or, potentially a letter of credit draw system, as we see with the NIH or the CDC awards that we have. There's a different strategy there, right? We have to see the patients in order to get paid versus we spend up to a budget, a ceiling amount, right? It's just a different methodology. It's a different approach, and understanding those things is critically important. Understanding, how we get paid, which is a part of your agreement under the payment section basically of your terms and conditions is important. And I think having a separate group for that to be reimbursed, again, based on your organizational size, this may be allowed or may not because of resources. But having a group that's managing that doesn't detract from the department's demands of managing the award is usually a group that's handling those, especially in your large size organizations. UMB is one of them, right? Where we have our shared services groups that kind of operate under this controller's office umbrella that holds us accountable. We have a financial report due at the end of the month. We will submit this report, whether you all have costs posted or not, because it's an audit. We have to appease the requirement of our sponsor. Hopefully you have the ability to track within your systems that you use each invoice with a unique generated document number to reference, because if you've posted that receivable or that invoice in your system and we haven't received payment yet, we need to make sure that we're following up to be paid. And at what point do you follow up and ask the question if payment has been remitted from the sponsor? Is there any additional documentation or follow-up items that we must provide? Was there a technical narrative or a scientific report or a progress report that was due by a certain period of time, which is why we're not getting paid? And have those communications made it back to the department on any non-delinquent items that unbeknownst to us, we might not know that was due? And this goes back to reviewing the agreement, reviewing terms and conditions, and making sure that we have adequate notes surrounding, when we have actionable items and when they are due. Not every department or organization is going to have if you're in a department, you have to have dedicated support for this. Not every organization is going to have dedicated support like an accounts receivable or billings department. If it's not handled centrally, it falls to the department. So it's a very critical item, ensuring that we're getting paid is taking place. And again, I talked about milestone and volume-based, clinical trials. Those are different types of approaches. And those are usually always monitored and invoiced at a department level, because the department would be the firsthand knowledge of what that enrollment might be. We touched on cash accounting a little bit. These are just applying payments that are made to a respective project at an organizational level. If you're doing business with the same sponsors, payments are trickling through, and they not maybe always have the identifying details. If you're partially paid, so it's very customary on a commercial clinical trial that there's a 10% holdback on the total payment that's revisited once the clinical trial wraps up. If you're partially paid, do you understand why? Do you have to modify the receivable accordingly? Were you partially paid for a particular reason because there was identified costs that the sponsor wasn't paying for? Or do you know those reasons? If you do not know what the payment's for, do we have a group that follows up with the sponsor to better understand what that payment was for? Is there a holding account that your department can request access to better track payments that are being made at an organization level? So you're not always notified of this. You could find yourselves in a situation where payment was made, but it wasn't applied to your receivable, right? So accessing to that holding account information, payments made within a certain time frame, 30, 60 days, it's helpful to have that holding account at an organizational level, because these would be payments that have been made recently that we would expect. And so if we have access to that information, we can take a closer look at it to see if any of those payments were specific to our department or our organization that we would need to claim. And likewise, kind of once it's in a holding account for a greater period of time, it eventually shifts to an unidentified account. In other words, UMB is going to cash that check, your organization is going to cash that check, but we don't know what it's actually for. And so, further investigation needs to take place. The compliance arm, is one that ensures the policies are being adhered to and being followed. They are usually approving cost or journal transfers. So the department is initiating a journal transfer and the compliance group is reviewing that. And they're saying, we're answering the questions, what took place, why it took place, and what's being prevented to prevent it moving forward, right? Those were always the questions that we had to answer on any 90-day late journal transfers. What happened, why it happened, and what are we doing to prevent it moving forward? What are we doing to strengthen our procedures, to follow the policies that the university or the organization has, so that we are not recurringly submitting late cost transfers, which could allude to account reconciliation processes that are compromised or perhaps even worse, not taking place or occurring. And this is all important to meet uniform administrative requirements, cost principles, and audit requirements for your federal awards, the terms and conditions that we all have to abide by. Costs must be allowable, allocable, reasonable, and timely. Generally, these principles are applied to other funding sources for consistency across the organization. And ultimately, transfers should be minimized given that costs should be correctly processed to the original account posting, right? So when a new award is set up, it's very customary for us to let the faculty member know, and maybe their lab manager or technicians or so on and so forth that are within that program, to what that account is. If you're looking to bill the CDC award, it's account number 123. And so if we know what that account is, and we know that we're billing costs for that specific project, there's really no need for cost transfers because we're billing those costs to the correct project at all times. But in places where you have hundreds and hundreds of accounts, like what I was coming from, cost transfer activity, or lack thereof could support that account reconciliation isn't taking place because costs aren't being reviewed. Also, on the flip side, increased cost transfer activity, specifically late cost transfers, could suggest that there's some weak procedures that are taking place that are maybe not following our policies that we have within the organization, and perhaps something further to investigate that might trigger an internal audit to see what exactly is happening underneath the car hood, so to speak, and how we can make those processes better, so that those negative things aren't taking place. Kind of following in with what I was already talking about with internal audits. We always hate them when we get them, but it's really an opportunity for us to establish and ask the honest questions to ourselves. What are we doing right? And what are we doing not so right? And what are the things that we can improve? And this is the office that tests whether these policies are being followed based on the procedures that you have set forth in your departments. And it could be anywhere from random samples, desk audits, department audits, ensuring the rules are being followed. And if departments are in a troubled state and continue to be in a troubled state because we see these late transfers, we see late FFRs, we see internal audits and random sampling audits, not fail. What is taking place there? What is the reason for that? And how do we develop better processes for the future? Our goal is to really learn from the past and adapt for the future. Usually it's not the organization that lacks the internal controls. It's the local execution of them not being followed, and understanding why is the key. And education and training ultimately becomes an outcome of an audit by leadership. That's very important, right? So a lot of individuals are looking for that education and that training to understand, why is this important? Perhaps, you never really know what it is until that audit takes place to understand, what individuals we have there. Longstanding individuals, they could be the approach, I've been doing it this way for as long as I've been here, and that's what I was told. So therefore I've done it this way. And then that's an opportunity to say, I understand why you did it this way, but this is the reason why we can't do it this way. And educating the employee as to how to do things within the confines of what the university or your organization would expect. And I mentioned this earlier, but in my experience, specifically at Johns Hopkins University, because I had the experience from both the controller's office side, but also in the department side, where we encountered a lot of internal audits and sometimes external audits. The areas that were always stressed, scrutinized, and looked at was account reconciliation processes, subrecipient monitoring, and effort reporting. Those were always the three areas that departments usually struggled with. Those were always the three areas that were always scrutinized. And it very much so was a volume-related dilemma. There was just so many accounts to manage and so many things to worry about and so many things to juggle. And so, I can identify with those, especially on this call, that are handling, what seems to be impossible levels of volume. It really puts you in a tough bind to understand and juggling all those priorities and making sure that we're doing the right things at all times. It can be a challenge. It really can. The other offices that I've touched on, policy and coordination office, conflict of interest office, research integrity office, we kind of went through all of these. I know I want to leave as much time for questions too. But, my concluding remarks and questions, from a university level point of view is an organization's framework can be complicated, but each respective group that resides within an organization is kind of specific to one area. Separating those duties and decentralizing those duties allows for greater efficiencies and subject matter experts even to develop within those areas, points of contact to reach out to. Hey, I have this problem within my department. Can you help me? That can really go a long way. Sometimes it's not what you know, sometimes it's who you know, right? Because that person that you do know, in fact, maybe knows it better than you. And, you can learn from that individual and learn how to do things better. I think these are all groups that are there to serve the needs of the department. They support the department in obtaining their goals. And so those are groups that should be available for those questions to be answered to support the departments and overall support the organization or the university's mission. And they are also the groups that provides the framework that allows us to conduct and manage research projects successfully. So, hopefully you have groups that are supportive of the department. Again, based on your organization size, that might not be the case. But these themes that I've talked about are themes that you can think of too and apply to your day to day, and who those individuals might be and where those separation of duties might exist. With it being an internal control of separation of duties, that provides a wide variety of bad outcomes. Generally speaking, no one should have the sole ability to initiate and approve transactions. AORs or authorized official representatives or signing officials should exist at every organization as a singular point of contact or group for communications on university matters. Sponsors don't want to have to reach out to 20, 30 people within your organization because they were assigned to a specific department. They want to reach out to one or two people, here's what we have, and then that gets pushed down to the department level. And departments rely on these shared services groups for expertise and insight into the challenges that they encounter. We touched on that, that the driving the efficiency and subject matter experts allows for departments to pave those relationships with these individuals within these specific areas to help better understand what are the things that I need to know in order to, make XYZ happen. And really, our goal, supporting faculty members with their research programs and supporting the department's mission, which ultimately supports the university's mission or your organization's mission. Our goal within the department should really be to strengthen compliance of our policies that our shared services groups support. And by strengthening our compliance within our own university or organization at a department level, we're positively impacting our ability to deploy and manage research projects successfully. And this is going to have a domino effect where, we have demonstrated that we can do, X number of awards well. And that's where you're going to see that growth in your organization as well, because, sponsors pay very close attention to our timeliness and reporting, getting back to them, timely submission of progress reports, timely submission of FFRs or financial federal, reportings at both the federal level, private level, just being good stewards of the money that we receive and conducting the good research that you all do on the day to day. I wanted to thank you all for your time and joining me today, and very appreciate your participation. And we greatly appreciate our collaborations with your team here at the IHV. And I'm happy to answer any questions. So thank you all very much for listening to me. I appreciate it.